Well, let's now move to a story we've been tracking very closely here on CNBC TV 18. The Cabinet has cleared the National Manufacturing Policy, which will facilitate the creation of mega industrial zones. The government has also proposed several fiscal incentives to boost the manufacturing sector. Joining us now to discuss the implications of the manufacturing policy, B. Muthuraman, the President of the Confederation of Indian Industry. Mr. Muthuraman, many thanks for joining us on CNBC TV 18. The government has set out a very, very ambitious plan in terms of what it hopes to achieve through the National Manufacturing Policy. The manufacturing ratio to GDP should be increased to 25% over the next 10 years and the creation of 100 million jobs. So if one were to actually just look at the steps that the policy is proposing, and the main point really comes in as far as land acquisition is concerned, we're talking about acquiring 5,000 hectares, which the policy proposes should be done by the state government. Now, how does this really align with the land acquisition policy? Because according to the Commerce Minister, the land acquisition policy will have to provision for these national manufacturing zones or NIMs.
Yeah, I know the land acquisition policy is under discussion. The LARR bill is under discussion in the government. But I don't see any contradictions here. Large tracts of land cannot really be acquired by the private sector. It's almost, because large tracts of land will have several thousands of landowners, and it is very difficult for any one private industry to acquire land that it requires. It may not be contiguous. It may not be in one. The basic idea of this national investment and manufacturing zones, which CII welcomes. Incidentally, it's a great policy, and it is required at this time for the Indian industry when manufacturing is going through a lean phase. Manufacturing needs to become at least 25%. In fact, in countries like Thailand, it is 40%. In China, it is about 34-35%. So manufacturing is fundamental to Indian economic growth. In terms of land acquisition,
I get that, Mr. Muthuraman, but I just want to interrupt you here, because this was a problem that we saw as far as special economic zones were concerned. The ambition of the government, the intention of the government, as well as the private sector, is very clear. But the question is, how practical is it? We weren't even able to get land for special economic zones, and we're now talking about 5,000 hectares as the minimum area required.
No, I know, I do understand that, but the national manufacturing, investment and manufacturing zones have actually better policies than the SEZs. They have far more progressive policies. I do know that the starting point is the acquisition of land, but I can tell you that there is just no other way in a country like India where you require large tracts of land for industries to share logistic costs, to share power costs and roadways and railways and so on. You need to have large tracts of land, and we must make a fresh attempt to ensure, to see how we can get those 5,000 hectares of land, at least, if not more. You go to any other country in the world and you have these large tracts of land, and we have to find a way to get it.
Well, we have to find a way to get it, but there's still a question mark on how we're going to be able to get it, Mr. Muthuraman. But let me come to you with the other issue, and that is the ownership issue. And the policy proposes that the ownership is really kept with the state government. They've also proposed a special purpose vehicle structure, which could be a joint partnership with a private operator. And it also says that the central government, in that sense, will be responsible for the infrastructure, etc. Do you think that this, at least, is a more practical way of approaching this?
It's a very practical way of approaching, where the state government identifies the land, predominantly non-agricultural land, wasteland, dry lands and so on, and at an appropriate locations, and then the central government takes the ownership of providing the basic infrastructure, so that the industries, when they come in, they don't have to spend too much of time in creating infrastructure and so on, but they will pay for the infrastructure. I'm quite sure that when the central government spends money to create the basic infrastructure, as and when the industries come into these, they will pay a proportionate cost, or whatever that is. And I think it's a very good and well thought out idea to create a special purpose vehicle. In fact, from the CII side, we have been propagating the creation of what we call it as land development corporations, which is a public-private partnership where you give the authority to the special purpose vehicle to develop the land, to get all the clearances necessary, to market the product.
And
think
that
it's a
is
very
what
good
they're
idea.
proposing now, is a single window clearance as opposed to having to deal with 70 different
Absolutely.
laws and a whole bunch of other agencies. One of the other issues that was proposed to be simplified as part of these NIMS or these large manufacturing zones was labor flexibility. Now, as far as the policy is concerned, at least the draft cabinet note that I have, which seems to suggest is that you can protect the interests of labor in the eventuality of a closure of a unit and provide a suitable mechanism using innovative job loss policy or a sinking fund. So they've also spoken about an insurance as far as labor is concerned in case of a closure. So some degree of flexibility being worked in there.
Absolutely. There is a degree of flexibility, and this is just the beginning of it. This is not the end of it. And you can, benchmark your labor practices with global benchmarks. And if there is an industry which falls sick or which is not doing well, which really genuinely needs a closure, we have to ensure that the interests of the workers are protected. The compensation to workers is actually better than what it was in the earlier policies. And I think all this is an extremely positive step. Because industry must have the flexibility to grow or to exit or to close depending on the market conditions, but simultaneously making sure that the workers don't suffer. So the idea is to create some new job policies or creation of a sinking fund from where the workers can be paid off and so on. These are extremely positive steps.
I want to come to the issue of funding, because the policy proposes several things. It says a venture capital fund will be granted a tax pass-through status with a focus on SMEs in the manufacturing sector. They've spoken about a separate fund being created under SIDBI. They've also spoken about rollover relief from long-term capital gains tax on the sale of residential property by a small and medium enterprises or an individual if he wants to get into the manufacturing space. Is this enough, and how much of this is going to have to come through by way of changes in the budget for this to really be a reality?
Yeah, there is going to be second and third steps in this whole mechanism, where for example you take capital gains tax. If there is an individual or a company which has got a real estate which is idle, which is not earning anything for the industry or for the country, he or she can sell it off and not have capital gains tax, and therefore he has an incentive to put it into this national investment and manufacturing zones to create manufacturing capacity which is needed for the country. Now, some of these things have to become laws in various places, and that's the next step that we need to go through in order to make sure that this policy is effective. You see, this policy is really a policy in principle, and it gives broad guidelines what is to be done, and there are a number of measures subsequently that needs to be done, and I hope this will be done, because fundamentally this is an outstanding policy for this country, and we have not had this policy for many years in this country.
All right, Mr. Muthuraman, I appreciate you joining us here and discussing the manufacturing policy with us and the implications that it has. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Well,